important to have our finances in place? And why is it important to have a CPA on our team?
Yeah, so there's two things. I mean, there's your taxes, and then there's your personal records and books and finances. And I mean, if your books are a mess, your taxes are going to be a mess too, because your taxes rely on your books, your personal records, like your business financials. So I do try and really encourage people to keep good records, whether that's on a spreadsheet, if you're a spreadsheet person, or a bookkeeping program like QuickBooks, like whatever works for you, as long as you can have that clear visibility into your business. And also that it's not just for your taxes. Like a lot of people really just keep records because they don't want to be audited. They don't want to mess up on their taxes, which is good. But I tell them you have to take it a step further. You have to do that for your own personal and business profitability purposes. Like you want to be in tune with your business and know what's going on with the numbers, because that's going to give you so much visibility and the ability to make decisions, and take action that's going to drive your business forward. So those are things that I'm always talking about.
Yeah. And what's the most common question that you get from your community or your clients?
The most common questions aren't always the most important ones. So I'll get questions like, do I have to keep receipts? Do I have to keep my receipts?
That's a very common question.
I mean, that's up there.
So what's the answer to that?
No, not necessarily. I mean, you should have some type of substantiation that supports that transaction, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a receipt. That's just the most common example. Yeah, I don't know. Do I need a separate bank account? A lot of people, I mean, there are new entrepreneurs being created every day. Like people are jumping in with side gigs or side hustles or whatever you want to call them. And most of them have never had any type of self-employment income. So, they really haven't had to deal with that aspect of taxes.
Yeah.
So it's totally foreign to, most people, which is why those questions are so common. And I like, that's why I do what I do, because I like helping them. And yeah.
Actually, that's a very common question for our business as well. Or like when other companies come like, do I need a separate bank account? And for all clarity purposes, I always say, yes, please have one. And the reason is because then you're not commingling your funds. And it's so much easier to like say that, hey, this is my personal stuff and this is my business stuff. And so that's generally my rule of thumb for most companies. But what would your answer be?
Yeah. I mean, if you're a sole proprietor, you should still at least have a separate bank account for tracking purposes, even though you don't necessarily need one from a legal standpoint. I think, I should probably align with you on a lot of this stuff I tell people, because another question I get is like, do I need an LLC?
Yeah.
If they're just starting out, I say probably not. It's probably not urgent at this point, especially if all you're doing is selling your old, jackets and t-shirts on Poshmark or online.
Yeah.
But if you were in some type of like more litigious industry like construction or something, then I might say that's probably a good idea. Am I on point with that?
Totally on point with that.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know. I love LLCs. I think they're fun, and they're also the easy way of getting the best of both worlds. And so for me, it's the same thing. Like I always say, let's do do an assessment of your risks and your liabilities versus not. And so that's how I kind of have them start thinking about whether they need one immediately or they can kind of hang out and get one later on. And then I also feel like with LLCs in particular, and then, corporations, you also need to have a vision for your business. Where are you taking this business? What is your expectations of generating money and income for your business? How are you generating capital? Are you going to a bank? Are you going to investors? And that also kind of will shift my opinion on which route to take and if you need to take it now or later.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I usually ask them, are you planning to grow this thing or just kind of like stick with it for a hobby? Because that'll impact what we decide.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'm totally on the same page with you now with that.
That makes me feel good. I had a roommate who is he's an estate attorney now in Arizona, but I asked him a few years ago, I was like, okay, why do you need a separate bank account, or why do you need a business bank account if you have an LLC and all this stuff? just to try to make sure I wasn't giving people bad legal advice. But
Yeah.
it's probably about time I catch up with somebody again.
Yeah, no, I'd love to have these conversations with you. But really, just to answer that basic question, also, it's the reason you need a separate bank account is to show that you're not commingling your funds. So you can have an LLC all day long, but behind the scenes, if you're commingling funds or essentially embezzling from your company, then that corporate veil of protection of liability will not be there anymore. And that will, you'll essentially pierce that corporate veil, as they call it, and so there's a lot of things that you have that protection, but for, and then a list of things that could puncture that.
Yeah. In my dumbed down language, I tell people you just have to act like a business,
Yeah.
or you put yourself at risk of some attorney out there saying, look, he's not acting like a business because they don't have that separate account or they're not doing that thing. So we can therefore
Yeah.
maybe come after
Yeah.
you.
So, what are your top tips for somebody who is running their own business? What would be maybe your top three or top five tips for them?
I think, yeah, they might be things I've already mentioned. Like, I think one of the first things I would do if you're starting out, whether you're a sole proprietor or an LLC or whatever, is just to get that separate bank account, like we've been talking about, because then you can start tracking the numbers so much easier and having that visibility into your business and being ready for tax time. It's just going to make it's just a good foundation to build your business on, and then potentially layering on some type of bookkeeping system on top of that. I mean, that's probably where I would, it's probably
Mhm.
my one of my top tips.
Mhm.
And then, I mean, another one is just not to stress out. It's probably not as bad or as complicated as you think. I mean, usually when I talk to somebody who's pretty flustered or stressed out on the phone, just after explaining, a few of these things that we've talked about, they'll usually end up saying like, oh, it doesn't seem like it's that bad. And I'll say, no, it's not that bad. Like, you're probably in a better spot than you think. There's probably less you have to do than you think. Like, even if you're starting out, you really don't have to go out and file a bunch of forms with your state or with the IRS. Like, you are a sole proprietorship by default. So I wouldn't let the fact that you're not an LLC or have some other type of formal organizational structure stop you from just starting. Like, if you're inclined to just start selling something or whatever the business is.
I agree. I agree. Like, yes, sole proprietorship is the default setting for everybody. So, those are great tips. And if there are, for tax purposes, are there some special tips for tax purposes that you would also highly suggest?
I mean, I encourage people to get a basic level of education, or at least just expose yourself to what the common types of deductions are. If you sell stuff online, like my audience does, like, learn how you should be deducting inventory, because that's something that's been changing over the past few years. You don't have to be an expert, but you can say, oh, I think I heard something about that one time. Let me go back and
Mhm.
check what that was.
Mhm. If you could just briefly share with us just a couple of those small actions that we can take for optimization in our businesses throughout the year, what would be a couple of those tips?
Yeah, again, like the foundational thing of bookkeeping, because if you don't have a record of your numbers, you're either going to overstate them, overstate your sales and your taxable income on your taxes, so you'll end up paying more taxes, which you don't want, or you'll understate them, which you really don't want, because then the IRS can come after you, for
Mhm.
for that amount you're not reporting. One easy example is, maybe you've been in business for a few years, and let's say you have like a $50,000 annual profit and you're still a sole proprietorship. Well, you come to me and I could tell you, well, you should have been operating as an S corp, because
Mhm.
then you don't have to pay self-employment tax, and you could have saved, like, I don't know, $5,000 to $10,000 just by changing that entity type. There are various things like that's kind of like money. What do they say? Low hanging fruit, like money on the table, like all that stuff. You don't want to
Yeah.
leave it there.
Yeah. And those are just things that you would actually find out from talking to someone like you. And I think it's so essential to have that line of communication open with, a CPA or a bookkeeper or somebody who can actually guide you in that way. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. So towards the end, I always ask my guests some of their favorite books, whether it is personal or whether it is professional book business, it doesn't matter.
one thing that I feel like really changed my mindset or helped to change my mindset early on was The Millionaire Next Door. So it was
Mhm.
really popular in the 90s, and it really shed light on what wealthy people really look like. And it's not what you think.
Mhm.
And I remember my dad bringing it home and just like telling us all this stuff. And I was like, oh, really? Like they could literally be our neighbor next door who drives a modest car, and they're not flashy, and they actually save their money and they work hard. So I just love that concept. So that's always going to be one of my all-time favorites, even though it's a little bit more dated now.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite business tools or apps?
Calendly, like the scheduling
I love it. Yeah. I use
tool. So I've been using that for a few years. And even like a year or two ago, to get the premium version or whatever, where you can have additional functionality where you can accept payments and stuff, I was like, I don't know if I want to pay the $100 or whatever it is. But I mean, it's a no brainer.
Yeah, it's so worth it.
It makes it a lot easier. I use Kajabi to host my course and for my email list now as well.
Hmm.
I use Windows PC. So I use Camtasia to record my course stuff that I do updates
Oh,
for. I mean, I use Instagram a lot for social media. I
yeah.
don't know, there's
Well, thank you so much. You have shared so much information with us today and so much of your wisdom. And I'm so thankful that you were on the show with me today as a guest. It was really wonderful talking to you. And now, if someone wants to reach out to you and connect with you, how do they do that?
yeah, you can just email me if you want. It's just Mark at Not Your Dad CPA, or I'm pretty active on Instagram as well. So same thing. It's just at Not Your Dad CPA.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mark.
Yeah, thanks for having me.